2019 Abbey Road 50th Anniversary Edition. In this version, we have just an outer slipcase with the original cover. The spine just says Abbey Road Anniversary Edition, complete track list on the back. And this just pulls off to reveal, similar to the White Album, a book that contains the disc, so not a separate disc holder. And the front and back cover of the book are exactly the same as what's on the front and back cover of the slipcase. No change whatsoever. On the inside cover, we have the CD with the new remix, which again just features the cover. Same, replicating the original front and back, with the exception that it lists Her Majesty, which the original cover obviously did not, but the Blu-ray and the original album cover are just the same on both, for the remix and the Blu-ray, with the 5.1 and Atmos mix. The first one with an Atmos mix. And the book, following the general font and design style of the Abbey Road album, albeit with some new colors. Same deal as before, intros by Paul and Giles Martin. Intro essay by Kevin Howlett about the context of this album, including how much of it was... Initially this album was going to be kind of an add-on to what became Get Back, before they decided to isolate some of that material and just create a new album altogether. So, track-by-track details with handwritten lyrics, tape box covers, lots of nice glossy photos, very detailed information about which instruments are on which track, which takes are used, as well as which takes appear on the sessions CDs, showing some of the work in progress. And it also discusses how many of the songs in the medley, 3 of them were recorded as 3 two-song medleys. So we have Sun King and Mean Mr. Mustard together, Polythene Pam and She Came In Through the Bathroom Window, and then Golden Slumbers and Carry That Weight, as well as The End and Her Majesty. And then we have some additional tracks that appear on the session. So Paul's demo of Goodbye, which he gave to Mary Hopkins, Ballad of John and Yoko, Old Brown Shoe, which was the B-side of that single, Come and Get It, which Paul did a demo of, initially released on Anthology. It's also included here, given to the Ivies, Badfinger, the cover, so just some outtakes from that photo session. The arrival of Abbey Road, so a discussion about its release, and then a wonderful essay by, I don't remember who wrote this. Who wrote this? This would have been David Hepworth. This is a really wonderful essay about the context of the album and just the events leading up to it and what it represented to the buying public at that time. Track listing, credits, back page, and then the sessions CDs are featured at the back, and those just both feature an outtake of the Abbey Road cover. So just different photos from the same session. And that is the Abbey Road box set. Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends. You're watching Angel 65. I'm Brandon Ware. This is my channel for all things music related, music posts, and music reviews. This is chapter 12 of the Beatles Deep Dive, and today we're talking about the Abbey Road 2019 Deluxe Edition box set. Let's start off with the album itself, Abbey Road. Now, I will say, after Revolver, Abbey Road is my second favorite Beatles album, and because of this, it was the first of the box sets that I bought. In 2019, when this first came out, I happened to be taking a college class called Music and American Culture, where we discussed 4 songwriters, John Lennon, Stevie Wonder, Bob Dylan, and Joni Mitchell, and just their impact on American culture. And during the Beatles unit, talking about John Lennon, it just reignited my passion for the Beatles, and it happened to be right around the time that the Abbey Road 2019 Deluxe Edition was released, and so I went out to a store and bought it. So this was the first of the Giles Martin remixes I heard. I got this before I even heard 1+, and this was my introduction to it. And I must say, I was thoroughly blown away by it. I could not believe how good the surround sound mix was. I had heard quite a few albums in surround sound by that point, but my collection had not expanded to the point where I now have so many of my favorite albums in surround sound. So this was one of maybe 13 or 14 surround albums I had in my collection at that time. It might have even been less than that. And I was just blown away by the surround mix. And I had not heard the Abbey Road album start to finish for some time before that, and it brought tears to my eyes when it got to the final end section. It really blew me away. Some standout moments were particularly the strings on Something and on The End and on Golden Slumbers and Carry That Weight. The strings just sound fantastic. On Maxwell's Silver Hammer, the little Moog synthesizer in the back channels, just very subtle. It's not loud, and neither is it in the original mix, but it's just there, and it's such a nice touch. And honestly, it brought my attention to things in the mix that I had never realized were there before, and just gave me a whole brand new appreciation for it, as did the book. The book blew me away. As it was the first of the box sets I bought, I was just blown away by the track-by-track details. Since I had not had the other box sets yet, I did not know that they went into that level of specificity, to the point of, this take was recorded on this day with this person engineering, and this track of the tape was used for this instrument. This is the reduction mix that was done. There were this many takes of the reduction mix, and then they overdubbed this, this, and this, wiping this, and this, etc., etc. Having already read the liner notes for the 2009 box set, I knew the Beatles made innovative use of the tape, but it blew my mind how innovative they were going in that track-by-track analysis for every single song, as well as learning that parts of the medley were recorded as two songs together. Just they went back to back and created a straight performance of like Polythene Pam and She Came In Through the Bathroom Window. Like, that was done live. The reason that edit is so seamless is because it's not an edit. That is a performance that overdubs were later added to. The only editing that was done was obviously at the end of I Want You, She's So Heavy. The tape is just snipped, and that's why it has an abrupt end. And then similarly, as the session discs in this box set point out, the original plan for the medley was to have Her Majesty in between Mean Polythene Pam and Mean Mr. Mustard and Polythene Pam. Instead of an abrupt switch between those two, the plan was to have Her Majesty at the end of Mean Mr. Mustard. It would travel across the stereo spectrum to where Polythene Pam starts. And in fact, on the session discs, you do get an edit of the long one, as they called it, where Her Majesty is in place there. And then the book details that it was actually left in by accident once they decided to go the other way and just have an abrupt switch from Mean Mr. Mustard to Polythene Pam. They just edited it out but saved it at the end of the reel, and so when they listened back to the mix, they got surprised by the fact that that was in there, and they forgot to edit it out, and so they left it in there. So as side 1 does, side 2 also has an abrupt start of Her Majesty and then a quick end after that. And then that's the epilogue of the Beatles' career. After this big climactic moment that is the end of the end, there's silence, and then Her Majesty just pops up for no reason, similarly to the way the garbled speech appears at the end of the gigantic final chord of A Day in the Life on the Sgt. Pepper album. And so all of these little details that I had never heard before just blew me away. It also blew me away that not every Beatle played on every track, which was especially true of the White Album, but true of a few songs on Abbey Road, and things like all of the harmonies at the end of The End are all done by Paul, which I suppose in a way you could argue makes it less poignant, but I don't think so. I still think it's just a beautiful piece of music. So those session CDs were really cool. I had heard a few bits and pieces of it on Anthology, but the 2 session CDs really go a lot more in depth, including the trial mix of the long one, the original Trident Studios take of I Want You, She's So Heavy, which apparently they were sidelined because there were people outside the building complaining about how loud the guitars were. And that dialogue is included on the tape. And especially amazing on those session CDs is you get at the very end of the second session CD isolated orchestra of both Golden Slumbers, Carry That Weight, and Something, and you can just really appreciate how beautiful the arrangements that George Martin did for those 2 tracks was. The session CDs really blew me away with just the dialogue included and the level of specificity between how the tracks were created in the book. It was absolutely phenomenal. And so, needless to say, once I had that, I was definitely determined to go back and find the rest once I could. At that time, I couldn't afford them, but about a year later, I was able to go back on Amazon and still find the White Album and Sgt. Pepper for relatively reasonable prices. I don't like those albums as much, although in my Sgt. Pepper video I argued that that's the most essential of all the box sets, and I still believe that's true. That's the one that benefits the most from the remixes, and hearing it deconstructed and put back together piece by piece on those session CDs is really amazing. Just to witness how beautiful the orchestration of that magnanimous brainchild was. Abbey Road is still pretty magnanimous, particularly that ending suite, and so hearing it for this was also spectacular. At the time I bought it, I did not have an Atmos capable system. When I first got my Atmos system, I had 6 albums only at that time that had Atmos mixes, and so of course I tried them all, and Abbey Road was one of them, and I must say it really upset me because I learned that because the impedance is not quite matched to my speakers, my amp couldn't handle just blasting it as loud as I wanted it to, so in the middle of She's So Heavy, the amp just shut off and went into protect mode, and at first I thought that was the edit point, and then Here Comes the Sun never came in, and I was like, what? And then I looked and saw the power was off, and I was like, damn it, that really upset me. And so I learned that day that I have to be careful when going into Atmos mode to make sure that my receiver doesn't shut off on me. I guess it was fitting that it shut off in the middle of a track where there was an abrupt end to it anyway after all that white noise. So, but the Atmos mix is fantastic. I listened to it again this week in preparation for this video, and it blew me away. And then I listened to the 5.1 as well to compare the 5.1 and Atmos mixes. I actually listened to the 5.1 on a different 5.1 system in my house, which is lower quality, but I figured I'd give it a try on 2 different systems. And they both sound fantastic, but the Atmos is obviously a lot more enveloping, although I think I could argue that the DTS HD Master Audio 5.1 is maybe a little bit punchier, but the Atmos is more enveloping, so I prefer the Atmos. And the new stereo mix is also fantastic. I have a standalone of the vinyl stereo mix as well, and that is just great to pull out and witness the nostalgia of that, particularly because it's a long album, you know, 47 minutes. Each of the sides is like approaching or over 24 minutes long, which at that time was pretty long. I think it's the Beatles' longest single LP. The White Album is obviously the longest total, but neither of the 2 discs on there quite approaches how long Abbey Road is. So it's their longest single thing contained on a disc released within their career. And it holds up to this day. I think it's a beautiful album. I always have, but it's particularly gained resonance thanks to what was written in the book. There is a great essay by, I said his name in the introduction and I already forgot it, but there's a beautiful quotation at the end which explains just why Abbey Road is so poignant. It goes something like this, that at the time we didn't know that the Beatles story would come to an end. Every story has an end. That's what makes it a story. The story of the Beatles is the greatest story in pop. Abbey Road is the ending that story deserved. And I really could not have said it any better myself. After, I won't say the White Album is a disappointment, and neither is Let It Be, Get Back, but those 2 albums compared to 66 and 67, I felt were very weak, and were the Beatles not showing themselves at their strengths and playing into really what they did best in 66 and 67, which was orchestration and using the studio as an instrument. While it was admirable that they wanted to go back to their roots and do what was effectively a live album for Let It Be, and the Let It Be Naked album shows that once you take out all the extra chat and the bad rehearsals, they actually did that quite effectively. While that was admirable, really it's the orchestration and the big grandiose production that made the Beatles what they are, and that is why Abbey Road is the perfect swan song for them to end their career on. And I would say of any last album by a band, it's the best last album by any band ever. It is just a perfect end to a career. The only ones that might give it a run for its money are Black Star, David Bowie, and Clockwork Angels by Rush. I thought Clockwork Angels was just a wonderful album to end their career on, even though it didn't technically end right as that album was released. It ended up being their last one they ever did. Abbey Road, you know, it's a convoluted story because Let It Be, of course, came out afterwards and showed the breakup of the band, although the Get Back cut is maybe a little more generous and shows that even in the darkest of times, there were still happy moments and they were still a good band, which is why I'm glad that documentary came out and that I got to see it. But really, Abbey Road is where it ends. That's the last cohesive, intentional album that they made together, and it is perfect. It is a perfect record, start to finish. Where to even begin? Come Together is a perfect opening track. It is one of John's best songs. It is funky, it is swampy, as Paul puts it, and it is just fun, the arrangement of it. I love it. It's a great opening track. Something is one of the most beautiful ballads ever. In fact, we can get it out of the way right now that the two, other than the medley, the two standout tracks on the album, the two best tracks on it, and arguably two of the best tracks in the Beatles' entire career, are George Harrison's contributions, which are Here Comes the Sun and Something. And in fact, I would say Here Comes the Sun is my favorite all-time Beatles track. I just love how upbeat it is. I love the arrangement of it. I love the subtle but tasteful use of the Moog synthesizer on it. George's vocal is great. Paul's harmony is great. Likewise on Something. The two of them together, you know, it's a shame that the Beatles didn't continue because I felt like Paul and George really could have helped each other a lot in their solo careers. I mean, Paul's bass playing on Something is just sensational. And of course, George Martin's orchestration on it is out of this world. Maxwell's Silver Hammer I was blown away by when I heard it as a younger person. I just couldn't believe how like dark and macabre it is set against this like rather upbeat rhythm, which is a trope that many bands have employed since, like an upbeat happy song but with an actually dark and like sadistic lyric about it. Always thought it was great. Love the anvil hits in it. In the Get Back documentary you can see Mal Evans, their roadie, is doing the anvil. But in the end, I think Paul did it on the album. Oh, Darling, love it. I think the vocal performance is great, and actually reading into how hard it was for him to get that vocal performance, trying and trying and trying. John said that it was a heavy song, maybe I should have done it, and perhaps that's true, but I think Paul did a phenomenal job of it, really leaning into his rock qualities and really like getting into that bassy end of his rough voice. It's a fantastic vocal performance. As is Ringo's performance on Octopus's Garden, his second track to be credited in the Beatles. It's a perfect arrangement of just a perfect little song. I think it's very entertaining, and I love that you get this upbeat, happy song with one of Ringo's best lyrics right before you get the sheer brazen darkness of I Want You, She's So Heavy, which is perhaps over the top because it goes on so long, as does Hey Jude, but you know what? It works. I love that the white noise just filters around it and just gets more and more intense, and then abrupt end. It's, you know what it reminds me of? Something that came out over 20 years later is the end of The Downward Spiral by Nine Inch Nails. Just the Hurt. You get this beautiful track, and then all of a sudden this abrasive, horrible, scary noise comes in, and then abrupt end. That's what it reminds me of. So again, showing that like what the Beatles did, people were copying them for years and years and years, or paying tribute to them, however you want to look at it. It's just such a dark and melancholy end to the first side, with some great organ by Billy Preston. Flip it over, Here Comes the Sun, the best Beatles track of all time, I think, opens the second side, which goes wonderfully into Because. Beautiful three-part harmonies. They open the Love album, which we'll talk about Love in the next video, but just those three-part harmonies along with the guitar and harpsichord is amazing. On the session discs you can hear John and George Martin recorded the organ and harpsichord together, and to keep time Ringo is clapping his hands while they're doing it. It's just, I love that they included that in there. So anyone who says Ringo can't keep time will suck on that. He kept time for John and George while they were playing that song, and then they triple tracked the beautiful vocal harmonies, all sung around one mic 3 times. Wonderful. And that is just a perfect prelude to the epic, unbelievably brilliant Abbey Road medley, which closes the album. And there it is, folks. That's the birth of progressive rock right there, is the Abbey Road medley. No, it doesn't tell a story. No, there's no reason these songs should connect to each other. But they do, and it works, and it's effing brilliant. It just, that first opening piano of You Never Give Me Your Money, it just gets me so excited now that I know what's coming. And I love the opening of that. I love the lyrics of that, and particularly George's solo leading into the One Sweet Dream moment. It just, oh, that gives me goosebumps every time. It gets me so excited. Just his perfect guitar licks. One Sweet Dream. That is just such a perfect moment, and it's actually getting me all teary-eyed almost talking about it, just because it gets me so emotional, that moment, knowing what's going to come right after it. That transitions brilliantly into Sun King, which is just great, really moody middle track that leads into John's other two compositions, Mean Mr. Mustard and Polythene Pam, both demoed for the White Album and brought up during the Twickenham rehearsals, and finally given a home in the Abbey Road suite. And then from there on out, Paul takes us home with She Came In Through the Bathroom Window, which is basically a complete song and could stand on its own outside of the melody, the medley that is, into Golden Slumbers, into Carry That Weight with some beautiful double-tracked vocals by Paul and Ringo, and again, the incredible orchestration, and it all comes to a roaring climax with the end, which I cannot think of a better way to end a career than the end. You get solos from all four members. You get Ringo's one and only drum solo on a Beatles track, followed by Paul, George, and John trading solos 3 times, and then that beautiful final moment, the tinkling piano, and in the end, the love you take is equal to the love you make. Lovely guitar fill, lush orchestration, and just like that, the Beatles' career is brought to a perfect close. The most perfect career in pop history brought to the most perfect close imaginable, with suitably fitting lyrics. In the anthology documentary, they say they didn't really know for sure that it would be their last album ever, but you know, whether they knew it or not, they certainly delivered and just ended their career the right way. If they had ended with Let It Be or with the White Album, to me personally, that would have almost been like a Love Beach. I mean, neither of them is that bad, but it just would have been like, wow, what a great band. And then they had to go out on something that wasn't a triumph. But no, they got it together. They did Abbey Road before Alan Klein came in and screwed everything up and just exacerbated the tension that was already there. But meanwhile, they were able to create one of the best albums of their career. It's still the best-selling album of their career, even though more so than Sgt. Pepper. And I put it 1 rank above Sgt. Pepper. So my top 3 Beatles albums are Revolver, Abbey Road, and Sgt. Pepper. Those 3 just get me every time. But the Abbey Road has a special place because it is the end, and just everything about it is perfect, right down to the cover of them walking across the road in the perfect V formation. It's just they're walking from their career as a band into their individual lives, and it's perfect. And I'm glad that they got to make that record before things got so tense that they couldn't handle it anymore. Amazing album. Absolutely outstanding album. Perfect start to finish. One of the 3 perfect albums I would argue they created. Although Rubber Soul and Help are also pretty damn perfect in their own right as well. But Abbey Road is special. It's a great album. And as the writer in the book said, it is the ending their story deserved. I know John would later say things like the medley is just kind of pompous and none of the ideas really go together, and like Sgt. Pepper, he said it works because we said it worked, and it's like, well, it works because each of the individual segments is a great song, the arrangement is great, and the sequencing is great, and just the poignancy of it all climaxing at that final moment. I mean, that is one of the most emotional moments in music history, is the ending of the end. It's just so perfect. There's that, and like maybe a few more tracks in rock history get me that emotional and excited. One of them being Supper's Ready, for sure. You know, the ending of that, Apocalypse and 9/8 through to the end, is just perfect. And Echoes by Pink Floyd is pretty damn perfect. Dark Side of the Moon is pretty damn perfect. But the Beatles did it first with the Abbey Road suite. And there it is. It's all right there. It's just a blueprint for progressive rock, even though the music itself is not particularly complicated, just stringing all these ideas together. It's genius, and it still works, and it's still an emotional album, and it gets me excited and emotional every time I hear it. If you've not heard Abbey Road start to finish, do yourself a favor, pick up at the very least the LP of the remix, because the remix is fantastic. Giles Martin did say the original mix was already pretty good. Obviously, they had more flexibility when making the stereo mix because they had 8-track tape, but the new remix does add a lot of girth and just clarity and detail to it, so it's well worth checking out. If it weren't for how good that remix was, I don't know if I would have gone back and acquired the other box sets that I had missed the first time around. So, well worth it, and a fitting close to the box set series after Let It Be was kind of a disappointing box set. Revolver was kind of a disappointing box set, but it's my favorite album, so I had to get it. But of the 5 box sets, the ones that offer the most value for money in terms of creation and the content they include are, for me, the Sgt. Pepper and Abbey Road box sets. If I had one gripe with both of them, it would have been, A, Sgt. Pepper, they could have included more session material, maybe another CD's worth. And B, both of them could have included the original stereo mix and high res on Blu-ray, just for completion's sake. But you already get those on the 2009 CDs if you have them, and the new remixes are better anyway. So that's my only gripe with both of them, but it's certainly not worth knocking a star off. So the Abbey Road box set, if you can find it for $100 or less, 5 out of 5. The book alone makes it worth it. It's just such a phenomenal journey into the recording process, and the thoughts by some of the people that write about it are very nice to read. And so that's it. That's the end of the Beatles' career and almost the end of this series. In my next video, I'm going to tie up some loose ends and talk about the Love, Yellow Submarine, and then the Red and Blue remixes. Just talk about those remixes, what I think about them, and then talk about the 5 releases in this entire chronology that I think were most important. I will say the Abbey Road box set is not one of them, but it's still well worth checking out. 5 out of 5. The album itself is a 10 out of 10, 11 out of 10, really. Just perfect album. All right, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think of Abbey Road? What do you think of the box set? What do you think of the box set series in general? And which ones do you think are most essential? I told you for me it's Sgt. Pepper and Abbey Road. Those 2 are the most essential box sets. All right, that's all for now. Thanks for watching. Bye.